Hello and welcome to Manticore. I'm Steve Tierney and I'm back again to talk about comics and other stuff that's like comics and that I'm interested in. So I'm so professional. Do you notice my startups are so kind of well rehearsed and polished? Anyway, I've had a really cool day actually. I've been going through more comics. Actually, I've been doing it for several days, so I can't do podcasts every day because I've just got too much work to do. But so I've missed some stuff, but I will backtrack and cover some of the fun stuff I've missed. But today is a good day. So I'm going to go through it. I've got a bit of a surprise, but I'm going to go through some of the other stuff and see what you think, and hopefully find some stuff that you like and that is enjoyable, and let you know how we're going with the kind of collection sorting from the loft. So for people who haven't seen this podcast before, go back and see the older ones. No, but seriously, for people who haven't seen my channel before, I'm an old school comic collector who stopped collecting comics and put all my stuff in the loft where they've sat for 20 years. I actually owned a comic shop for a while, so I've got a hell of a lot of comics. I thought I had about 30,000. As always, you overestimate these things. Looking now, I'm quite a way through sorting the collection now, and I would estimate it's more like perhaps 15,000, but it's still a lot of comics. And along the way, I'm probably buying more than I'm selling, but I am starting to sell them as well. And I'm also building a website to sell them on because I don't have to pay all the ridiculous fees for things like eBay and stuff if I do it that way. So without further ado, let's kind of show you what we've got today. So while sorting through my collection, a lot of this is DC. So for Marvel fans, I'll do a Marvel one another day, but I'm doing a DC sort of box at the moment. So that's not all of it, but some of it. So I've got things like this, Starman. Now, Starman was a short-lived comic. Well, I say short-lived. I think it lasted a few years. It was got to about number 40 or something. And he was DC's attempt at making a completely new superhero that wasn't related to any of the ones that went before. Now, there have been other heroes called Starman, classic ones, but this was totally different, this guy. And he had, I forget his powers, he could fly, I think. He had sort of energy blast, he could change his shape, his face, and look like different people. It was a weird mix of powers, anyway. And they had some fairly adult themes. I mean, it was still, it wasn't like Vertigo, but some of the themes touched on stuff that's perhaps a bit more serious than you would normally see in a comic book of its type. I enjoyed it, I collected it throughout. But it never did very well, didn't sell very well, and eventually closed down, and they killed the poor sod off. So he's gone, and they've never brought him back. So this is one of those ones I was talking about in other podcasts when I said, you know, almost everyone seems to come back, but poor old Starman didn't come back. So that was it for him, really. Anyway, not worth a penny, that one. Then I found some of these old Brave and the Bolds, like this one here. That's Batman and the Metal Men. I love the Metal Men. Here's Batman and Plastic Man. Kind of a comedic, stretchy character like Marvel's Elongated Man and DC's other one, Plastic Lad, who used to be a sidekick of Superman, Jimmy Olsen. And there are others, obviously, stretchy people, but Plastic Man's quite a well-known one. And there's another DC one called Elongated Man. So, and he's actually, he's a kind of a detective like Batman, but a bit of a bumbling one. Plastic Man, on the other hand, was always played a bit for laughs, but they've had a few serious moments, and I actually think when they take a funny character and do a serious comic about it, that's always good, but this one isn't one of them. The thing about these Brave and the Bold, here's Batman and Zatanna. Zatanna and her father Zatara, they are magic-using wizard superheroes. They say magic. They say words backwards and make spells happen, which is a bit of a contrived method, but it dates back a long way, and they've held it on. But it's kind of fun. But these Brave and the Bolds, they're quite old comics. I remember reading Brave and the Bolds when I was a kid. So, and these are quite old ones, but they're not worth nothing. A couple of quid each. Going a bit more modern, there is a Marvel one for you Marvel people. I found an Extreme X-Man for some reason tucked in this box with all these DC stuff. Didn't really follow the X-Men through this kind of period here, which is, when was it? Don't really know actually, but the early noughties I think was when these ones came out. Dark Horse Maverick 2000. So I think that's Concrete. It looks like Concrete, I'm sure it must be. He's, I love Concrete, he's a fantastic character. Really, the humanity in the writing of that comic is incredible, and I've actually got the collected edition with all the bits, and I've read it a number of times, and I really enjoy it. It's actually quite sad, and quite inspiring in places, but also quite sad. It's about a man who gets turned into a monster, much the same way as they did with The Thing, has to then deal with not being human anymore, not being able to experience things humans can experience, but being this massive superpowered hero. So there's a lot is expected of him. A lot of he has to solve a lot of problems, but doesn't stop with inside. He's just a man. It's quite lovely. The story is really quite touching. And I think that's him. I love it if somebody now says, no, Steve, Dark Horse Maverick 2000 is about a character that looks a bit like concrete but isn't concrete. Haven't read this, but it's in great condition. Not worth very much. Then I found these. Now these are from the late 80s, 87 I think. These are Shazams. And as you can see, I've got all four. It's a 4-part mini-series of Shazam. And this was, they relaunched it. So Shazam is the original Captain Marvel. Now, you guys who watch kind of modern movies know Captain Marvel as a woman in the most powerful Marvel character, apparently, so we're told. Doesn't really match with the comic books, if we're honest, but she is quite powerful. The original Captain Marvel in Marvel Comics was a man, Captain Marvel. I've mentioned this before, who I used to really like. Not so keen on the new one. But before that, there was a Captain Marvel in DC, this guy, who you will know from recent movies, if you go to the movies, as what they now call him Shazam. Now, originally, Shazam is the magic word that he said to turn into Captain Marvel, and the comic was called Shazam. And I think it was, you would easily, I remember when I was a kid, I always thought it was Shazam, and I'd be like, why are they referring to him as Captain Marvel, until you kind of clock on, excuse my phone, until you clock on that actually it's, that's not his name. It's very unusual for a comic to be called something different to the character, but that's the case. And I don't know why. I'm guessing they changed it because of the confusion between the different Captain Marvels, or maybe Marvel Comics decided that they didn't like the Marvel name being named. I really don't know the background to it, but all I can tell you is that it's nice to have all 4 of this mini-series completely collected. This was the relaunch. So they had, it goes back a very long way, the original comic, but they relaunched it for a new age in the 80s, and then he's grown from there and had several more relaunches, and has appeared in lots of big crossovers. In the old days, this Captain Marvel didn't used to really interact with the rest of the DC universe, hardly at all, but following this launch, he started interacting with all of them, and there was a whole Marvel family. There was another one, Captain Marvel Jr., and then there was Miss Marvel, Mary Marvel, and there was even an Uncle Marvel, I think that was his name, Uncle Marvel, and he didn't have any powers but pretended he had. It was quite funny. And a lot of these, there were a lot of hat tips to this in the movie. I really loved the movie. I mean, a lot of people who know the original Captain Marvel didn't love the movie, but I thought there were enough hat tips for me, and I thought it was a lot of fun. It was all a bit woke, but in a nice way, in a well-written way, and I really enjoyed it. Looking forward to the sequel. Okay, back to Brave and the Bold. Here's Brave and the Bold with Sergeant Rock. And Sergeant Rock is a war hero. Now, back in the day, war comics were all the rage. Lots of people read. There were all sorts of different war comics. We'll get to a couple more later. And Sergeant Rock and his Howling Commandos was a very popular one. It went on for hundreds of issues. But they've gradually lost popularity. But Sergeant Rock crops up again every once in a while for various storylines. And there he was crossing over with Batman. Now, this is a fun one. This guy is called Wild Dog. And I remember reading this. It came out in 87 again. A few of these are 87. Must be that kind of box. But Wild Dog's got no powers. He's just a kind of a nutter. He's a vigilante who doesn't mind killing people. That's the gist of it. So it was taking it a bit to the edge, really. This is a 4-part mini-series. This is the first one. And then they did do, I think, an unlimited series that didn't last very long. And he's crossed over a few times into the mainstream DC universe. But he's interesting. He wears a hockey mask. Well, it's not a hockey mask. He wears this mask, you see. Whatever sort of mask that is. Looks like a serial killer. Acts like a serial killer. It's one of those edgy characters. Is he a hero? Is he too far to be a hero? Like Marvel's Punisher, I suppose, would be a good example. But I like Wild Dog. I thought he was good. Then there's this short-lived guy, Scratch. And Scratch is basically this massive werewolf. The Batman's on the cover. It's a bit of a con, because Batman appears very briefly for a few panels, never interacts with the main character at all. I think they thought, put Batman on the cover, get a bit of a launch for the comic. Didn't work. The comic kind of flopped. But the guy who made this, Sam Keith, I think he's the guy who did some other... I think he did The Max and a couple of those other independent comics or Image comics that did quite well. And his writing is great, the story is great, but it just never really caught on. But it's a little bit like Captain Marvel, which I forgot to mention. The DC Captain Marvel's a kid who turns into an adult superhero, just like the movie. And a lot of the laughs are played with the difference, with the kind of adult still being a kid inside. And this was the same. This was a teenager who becomes this massive, terrifying werewolf. It's a fun story. I wish it had carried on, actually. Then I came across this. Here you go. Now, DC did a series called Marvel Classic Comics, where they basically turned into comic book form classic stories. This one's Robin Hood. This one was 20p in its day, so that dates it back to definitely the 70s. It's in nice condition, actually. Look at that condition. really. I mean, it's not. I would say it's probably fine. What's called fine condition. It's not worth very much. A few quid. You'd hope it would be. Now I've got some of these Catwomans here. I've already had the Catwomans out, and these are just some strays. I've already put away most of the Catwomans. But this is when they were drawing Catwoman really like a woman, if you like. You know, I mean, she's very attractive. She's very shapely. These comics sold really well. After this, they kind of went... they modernised it, and there was a time when they decided they didn't really want to draw women with big assets anymore. So a lot of the mainstream started to draw them with less feminine shapes, I suppose. What they would call more real shapes. Although I do know people that look all these different ways, so I think that's an unfair comment. But this was probably the classic series of Catwoman. This sold a lot. They don't sell so well now, but Catwoman crosses over a lot with Batman now, and there are mixed views about how that turned out. So this is it's like a trade paperback, or certainly bigger than a normal comic. I don't know what these are called. Batman Bane. You probably will all know Bane if you've watched any of the Batman movies. You know Bane's the guy who broke Batman's back and put him out of commission for a long time, and then triggered a lot of storylines that happened while he recovered from that traumatic event. Bane has gone on to be beaten by Batman. He's made a few returns. He's been in lots of stories. I haven't seen them all because a lot of that went on into the period where I wasn't reading comics. Excuse me while I get my giant tea. Yes, if you're not from England, I am drinking a big thermal mug of tea because I am British and that's what we do. Right, well, we don't all drink thermal mugs. Some British ladies are going, what? It's got to be in a pot with a cup and a saucer. I know. I like it, whatever. This is actually biscuit tea. You can get it from Tesco's, and it's odd. It's a tea with the flavour like it's been dunked with malted biscuits. And I don't know if you think that sounds disgusting, but I'm absolutely addicted to the stuff. Right, then I came across this Deadpool Circle Chase. This is a graphic novel. And or it might be a collected set of comics. I'm not quite sure. I haven't read it. Must date back to when I had the shop. All this Deadpool stuff is worth money now. Not a fortune, but it's all gone up in value because Deadpool is so hot. So every time I find a new Deadpool thing, I'm like, yes, get in there. Now, if you're not an adult, avert your eyes because this is a rude one. But here we have Pandora Special. And this is an Avatar comic. This is one of the period I've talked about before where they still do it actually, but they don't do it as much as they did in the 90s, where lots of comics were coming out with kind of semi-clad characters on it, and they always sold well. So they still do it, but not as much as they used to. Now this is an old comic, the DC Freedom Fighters. Now the Freedom Fighters were an interesting team. I forget all of them. There was a guy called Black Condor and a Bomb Man who could basically just blow up. And then there was Uncle Sam. This guy with the tall hat is Uncle Sam. There he is. And I forget her name. This is the Ray. This guy here is the Ray, I remember. This is Doll Man. But I forget what the girl is called. Just slipped my mind. I should know. But anyway, this is an old comic. I mean, it's 12p for goodness sake. And it's in fantastic condition. Now, although these are not massively sought after, all these older ones in good condition like this tend to sell for more money, 10, 15, 20 quid. So, and that's based on what I get from Comic Base. Now, I've been looking on Facebook and I've been watching a lot of the Facebook groups that sell comics. And quite often they go for much more than Comic Base is describing they are worth. And I've also been looking on Amazon. Now, you can sell comics on Amazon. I may start doing that. Individual issues, just like you can eBay. And I'm not a big fan of eBay for selling, so I think that's probably a way I'll go in future. And they also go for better prices on Amazon, it seems, but maybe they're not selling because you can do a search on eBay and see what things have actually sold for, but I'm not aware of a way you can do that on Amazon. Perhaps you know different, I don't know. Then I run into some of these Savage Dragons. These Savage Dragons, I've talked about these before. This is by a guy called Eric Larson, and I absolutely love his work. And I love the character Savage Dragon. But what I love more than Savage Dragon is the massive cast of other heroes and villains and characters that come in and out of this comic. Hundreds of them. He seems to be able to create new, weird and wonderful characters like that. I mean, this guy is so creative. And I haven't read some of the newer stuff since I stopped collecting. And some people have said it's not as good as it used to be. I really hope that's not the case because I do love it. But I'm going to be keeping my Savage Dragons. I won't be selling those. Right, so then I found this. Now this is This is a series called Identity Crisis. And as you can see, I've got all of them. So this was a 7-issue mini-series. And it was quite a big event in DC. The gist of it was one of the heroes' wives, one of the superheroes' wives, who wasn't a powered hero, obviously, was murdered. And they didn't know who did it. It was a mystery. And then the current Robin's dad was also murdered. And so it looked like somebody was picking off the families of superheroes. And all the superheroes got together with Batman and kind of others trying to work out who had done it. And it was a big crossover, lots of people involved, and everyone was guessing on who it might be. I won't spoil it because it's a really well worth a read, and there were a few red herrings before you find out who did it, but it was a really interesting comic, and I've got every one of them, including that's actually not one of them, don't know why I picked that one up, but I've got the entire one, and every one of them is in near mint to mint condition, absolutely perfect, like the day they come out of the box. Now I checked on eBay, and sadly these aren't selling for a very great deal even for the whole set. You know, we're only talking about 15-20 quid. So shame, I may not sell those because I like the story and I don't really want to lose it. So I might keep it until the value goes up a little bit. Another one that I really like. This is stuff that I actually collected for myself, not part of my old shop or anything like that. So this is called the Secret Six, and I've got all 6 of these mini-series, and then it went on to 2 or even 3, I think, continuous series, but this was the mini-series that started it. So there was an event in DC called Villains United, which focused on all the villains and how they got together to try and turn the tables on the heroes. And the Secret Six are not quite villains. They are baddies, you know, and they've all fought the heroes before, but they're not quite as bad as the others, and some of their motivations are a little bit better. And so the sort of anti-heroes, and this series and the following series follow that on. It's kind of fun. If you enjoy the kind of Harley Quinn, I'm a baddie but I'm also a goodie thing, Secret Six did that well. Led by a guy called Catman. Sounds very derivative, I know, but really quite an interesting character. Written by a lady called Gail Simone, who has gone on to be a bit of a pain in comics, in my opinion, but did some really good work on Secret Six and other titles, I'm sure. Okay, so sorry we're still on DC, guys. I will do a day of Marvel. I know a lot of you are Marvel fans, but as I did warn you when I first started this podcast, I'm first and foremost a DC guy, even though I have thousands of Marvel. And this is this was part of the Infinite Crisis thing. This is the Ran Thanagar War. Ran is where Adam Strange comes from. Adam Strange, yes, Adam. God, my name's gone. Adam Strange. So Adam Strange is the guy. Is this guy with the red kind of spiked helmet? He's just a human being. And he travels to Van, where he puts on a jetpack and carries a laser gun and is a hero on that planet. And Thanagar is where Hawkman originates from, Hawkman and Hawkgirl, or used to in the old days before they messed around with the origin. I think they've done that now. And the 2 planets go to war, and loads of heroes are dragged into that kind of mess. Didn't love this story myself, so probably will sell this one. It was okay, but it wasn't. The spacefaring ones are never really I prefer Earthbound adventures. Which is why I've never really caught on to Green Lantern, because even though I like the character, a lot of the adventures take place in space, and the whole Green Lantern Corps thing, I prefer my heroes to be heroes and not sci-fi, but I know I'm very much in the minority with that. I've got this Batman Legends of the Dark Knight. Now, I don't know if you can see that. It's a bit glossy for you to see it properly, but there was this 1 month back in the 90s when 97 again, when every one of the DC titles released their cover with a big face of the main character on it. And I remember thinking it was interesting because that was when I owned a comic shop, and all of the front comics on all the rows all had big faces, and it made a really interesting display for that 1 month. Didn't really do anything special with the comics, but it was an interesting gimmick. So we're getting towards my kind of surprise now. So I was telling you there used to be a lot of war comics. This is another one of them, Our Fighting Forces, in this case featuring the Losers, who were, I don't really know the Losers very well. They weren't really losers, I don't think. They were just a group of brave war heroes, American war heroes, who got a bit down on their luck sometimes. They tend to stumble into difficult situations. I think there was a guy called Captain Storm and some others. They were good fun adventures if you like kind of military adventures. And there was always a kind of a twist or an interesting thing going on. But these sold well, and this is old, and it's in a very good condition. That's a very good condition. It's a bit down on the list, but that's an actual comic book condition. It's got a 10p stamp on it here, which some stupid, I don't know if you can see it, but some stupid person has stamped on there. I don't know if that affects very good or not, but it's not worth a lot of money. But then we've got Eman here. I really like Eman. There's nothing special about Eman. He's a massively powerful superhero that has gone. I think he was Atlas or Charlton, one of the two, and this one was Modern Comics, so it even predates that. I think 35 cents. The reason I like Eman is because I remember it as one of the very first comics I read when I was a kid, and I came one Christmas. I came into a large pile of comics, and I'll tell you that story on another podcast. But at the cost of my cousin. Sorry, I'm really sorry, Tim, but these things happen. I was young and I came into these comics because I was given them. There's a bit more to the story than that, but I will explain another time. And I took them home and spread them all out, and I only had, like, at the time, maybe 20 or 30 comics to my name, and I came into several hundred comics, and one of them was Eman, and it was so different. I'd heard of all the others, I'd never heard of this one, and I really liked the fact that there was this. I didn't even know back then there were indie comics with different titles going on, and I was really into the fact that he was so different. And even now, at 51 years of age, I still remember that joy, and I've got a very soft spot for this character, so I'm going to be collecting them. So I'm pleased to have found that. And then I'm just turning over these comics, and I turn over this one. Now, this is quite special, because this is an original issue 1 Conan the Barbarian, and that's pretty cool. I'm just going to show you. So just get it out of its cover. I've got to be really careful with it because it's in absolutely fantastic condition. But so this was published in 1970. I mean, just look at that condition. That is in very nice condition, he says, very carefully putting it back in its bag. Because this baby is one of the most expensive ones I've found yet. So, how much it's worth depends on who you speak to. Don't worry, this nothing wrong with the comic, my bag is stuck to my board. Yeah, so, this baby, depending on who you speak to, is worth quite a bit of money. If you look on Comic Base, it's worth a few £100s. There aren't any selling for that price. There's one guy selling a copy of this in near mint condition for £5,000 on eBay. Mine isn't in near mint condition. It's in fine to very fine, I would say. That still means it's worth quite a chunk of money, though. That's probably the single most valuable comic I've found so far, if I can sell it for that price. I like it and I like owning it, but at that sort of price, I think I've got to sell it. So that one's got to go. But I knew as I was working my way through the pile, I knew that I was going to find some with a bit more value. I mean, there's not going to be any of these monster value ones. I haven't got AU Action Comics number 3 or Detective Comics number 7 or any of these ones that are worth tens or hundreds of thousands of pounds. I've got nothing like that in my collection. I'm just not old enough, and I haven't. When I was a kid, there was no way for me to even get stuff that old. But I've got some gems in there, and already I've got my collection is currently valued, and I've still got a good quarter to a third of it to price up, and some of that is the oldest stuff, and it's currently in almost at £20,000 in value on Comic Base. And I've been trying to be careful to down value the comics, to downgrade their I've tried to not be overly generous with how I'm rating their condition, because it's easy to say, well, that's fine when it's only very good, or it's very good when it's just good, or even poor sometimes. So you've got to tread carefully with your gradings. You mustn't give things near mint unless they really are virtually perfect. I think I'm getting there, and I'm quite excited to have found that Conan. Just once again, look at this baby. He's lovely, isn't he? Anyway, that is going in a very safe place, and that's pretty much it for my podcast for today. So I guess what I'll do is play my music again.